The red tunic weighs 14 pounds. The bearskin hat adds another pound and a half. In summer heat that climbs past 90 degrees, Guardsman James Mitchell stands motionless for 2 hours, sweat pooling in his boots, tourists snapping photographs inches from his face. A child tugs at his trouser leg. A drunk American waves a beer bottle near his chin. His girlfriend poses for selfies, making faces, expecting him to break. He doesn't move. Not because regulations demand it. Not because officers watch from windows above. James Mitchell stands perfectly still because in that moment, beneath the weight of wool and fur and centuries of tradition, he becomes something larger than himself. He becomes the living embodiment of Britain's unshakable bond with the crown. Every breath he doesn't take, every muscle he doesn't twitch, every bead of sweat he ignores speaks to something deeper than ceremony. This is the story of how ordinary men become extraordinary symbols. How working-class lads from Manchester and Birmingham and Glasgow transform into guardians of a monarchy that has survived civil wars, world wars, and the collapse of empire. How the red tunics and tall hats mask faces of soldiers who have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Northern Ireland, carrying both the weight of history and the scars of modern warfare. But mostly, this is the story of what happens when the cameras stop rolling, when the tourists go home, and when the men beneath the uniforms reveal why they chose to become more than ceremony. The alarm clock screams at 4:30 in the morning. James Mitchell's hand shoots out from under thin barracks blankets. Muscle memory, silencing the noise before it can wake his roommate. The room stays dark. No windows in the basement quarters of Wellington Barracks. Just concrete walls painted institutional green and the smell of boot polish that never quite fades. Mitchell's feet hit cold linoleum. 26 years old, 5 years in the Grenadier Guards, and his body still protests the early mornings. But protest quietly. Always quietly. The Queen's Guard doesn't groan, doesn't complain, doesn't acknowledge that human beings weren't designed to stand motionless for hours while tourists treat them like wax figures. "You awake, Welsh?" Mitchell whispers to the lump in the opposite bunk. Unfortunately, David Welsh throws off his covers and sits up, pale skin, dark hair stuck up at angles that would make his mother laugh. 22 years old and still looks like he should be in school instead of guarding palaces. What's the roster today? Mitchell checks the duty board by the door. Names written in precise military script. Assignments that determine whether they'll spend the next 8 hours protecting the most famous woman in the world or standing guard over empty rooms that tourists pay 30 pounds to photograph. You're on Windsor. I'm at Buckingham. Welsh groans. Actually groans, which breaks protocol, but nobody's listening at 4:30 in the morning. Tourist season. There'll be 3 deep around me by noon. Could be worse. Could be raining. It's always bloody raining. But they're both already moving because complaining changes nothing. Shower, shave, breakfast in the mess hall, where 50 other guardsmen sit in relative silence, spooning down eggs and beans and toast that tastes like cardboard but provides fuel for the hours ahead. Nobody talks much in the morning. Conversation requires energy they'll need later. Mitchell studies faces around him. Boys, most of them. 18, 19, 20 years old. Fresh out of basic training, assigned to ceremonial duties before they understand what they've signed up for. Some will last 6 months before requesting transfer to regular infantry units. Others will discover something in themselves they didn't know existed. The ones who stay don't do it for the ceremony. They do it for what the ceremony represents. Mitchell. Sergeant Major Thompson's voice cuts across the mess hall like a blade. 30-year veteran. Served in the Falklands, Bosnia, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Chest full of medals, face full of scars, and absolutely no patience for guardsmen who think standing still is easy duty. "Yes, sir," brief the new lads after breakfast. "Windsor detail." Mitchell nods, glances at the 3 fresh faces sitting together at the corner table. Still excited about their red tunics. Still think this job is about looking pretty for cameras. They'll learn. After breakfast, Mitchell gathers the 3 new guardsmen outside the armory. Their names are Peterson, Collins, and McLeod. Peterson from Birmingham, working-class family, joined the army to pay for university. Collins from London, father was Metropolitan Police, wanted something different. MacLeod from Scotland, fourth-generation military, grandfather served in Burma during World War II. Right, Mitchell begins, voice carrying the authority of experience. Forget everything you think you know about this job. Forget what you've seen in films. Forget what tourists expect. Today you become invisible men who are completely visible. You become weapons that never fire. You become soldiers who fight battles without moving. Peterson raises his hand like he's still in school. Sergeant, what exactly are we guarding against? I mean, realistically, what threats? Everything. Mitchell's response is immediate, absolute. Terrorist attacks. Lone gunmen. Protesters who want to make political statements. Drunk idiots who think climbing palace gates is funny. Photographers who will do anything for the perfect shot. Children who don't understand boundaries. Adults who should know better but don't. He pauses, studying their faces. Still eager. Still innocent. But mostly, you're guarding against the idea that any of this could disappear. The monarchy isn't just about one person wearing a crown. It's about continuity, stability, the notion that something can survive when everything else changes. Wars end. Governments fall. Prime ministers resign. But the crown endures. MacLeod speaks up. My grandfather said the same thing. During the war, he said people needed to believe something would still be there when the bombs stopped falling. Your grandfather was right. Mitchell checks his watch. Now listen carefully, because I'm only explaining this once. The tourists will try everything. They'll make faces, tell jokes, wave objects in front of your eyes. Some will deliberately try to make you laugh. Others will try to make you angry. Ignore all of it. What if someone actually threatens us? Collins asks. Armed police are watching. Always. You won't see them, but they're there. Your job isn't to respond to threats. Your job is to embody something that can't be threatened. The three young men exchange glances, beginning to understand this isn't what they expected. The uniform weighs more than you think, Mitchell continues. Not just physically. When you put on that red tunic, you're carrying the weight of every guardsman who wore it before you. Men who died at Waterloo. Men who charged at the Somme. Men who liberated concentration camps. Men who served in Northern Ireland when bombs went off every week. He opens the armory door. Rows of immaculate uniforms hanging like scarlet ghosts. Bearskin hats on wooden stands, each one a small monument to tradition. Weapons cleaned to mirror brightness, even though they'll never be fired in anger while on ceremonial duty. The bearskin hat belonged to Napoleon's Imperial Guard. Mitchell explains as he helps Peterson adjust the chin strap. We took them at Waterloo. Every hat you see here is a war trophy. Remember that when tourists laugh at how silly you look. Collins struggles with the weight of his tunic. 14 pounds of wool and brass, designed for men who spent their lives in physical labor, not computer programming. How long before you get used to it? You don't get used to it. You learn to carry it. Different thing entirely. Outside, London is waking up. Traffic building on Constitution Hill. Early commuters heading to work, most of them ignoring the red-coated figures taking their positions around Buckingham Palace. To them, the guards are part of the landscape. Decorative elements that make London feel more historic, more important than other world capitals. They don't realize they're looking at active-duty soldiers. Men who've served combat tours, who've seen friends die, who've made life and death decisions under enemy fire. The ceremony isn't their primary job. It's their current assignment. Tomorrow they might be deployed to Afghanistan. Next month, they could be conducting counterterrorism operations in Britain cities. Mitchell takes his position outside the palace gates. 2 hours until the changing of the guard ceremony. 2 hours of standing absolutely still while the world flows around him like water around a stone. The first tourists arrive by 8 o'clock. Japanese tour group, cameras already clicking. Guide speaking rapid Japanese, probably explaining the historical significance of what they're seeing. Mitchell catches a few words: queen, tradition, symbol, universal concepts that need no translation. A little girl breaks away from her parents, walks directly up to Mitchell. She's maybe 6 years old, wearing a pink dress and carrying a stuffed horse. She stares up at him with complete fascination, as if he's the most interesting thing she's ever seen. "Mummy, why doesn't he talk?" Her mother hurries over, embarrassed. Saw the, come away, Sarah." But Sarah doesn't move. She reaches out one small hand and gently touches Mitchell's white glove. Her expression is serious, thoughtful, as if she's trying to solve an important puzzle. "Are you real?" she whispers. Mitchell doesn't respond. Can't respond. But something inside him shifts slightly. This child sees something her parents don't. She understands, instinctively, that she's encountering something rare, something that exists outside normal experience. Sarah's mother pulls her away, still apologizing. But the girl keeps looking back over her shoulder, waving at Mitchell with her free hand. And though no one can see it, though his expression never changes, something behind Mitchell's eyes waves back. More tourists arrive. Americans, Germans, Australians. All with cameras, all expecting performance. Some try the usual tricks, jumping in front of him, making faces, telling jokes. Mitchell remains perfectly still, not because regulations require it, but because stillness is his contribution to something larger than himself. A group of teenagers from Manchester recognized his accent when he spoke to the new recruits earlier. One of them, a boy about 17, approaches more respectfully than the others. "You're from up north, aren't you?" the boy asks quietly. Mitchell doesn't respond, but the boy continues anyway. "My dad was in the army, so it was the best thing he ever did. Gave him purpose, structure." The boy pauses, looking around at the palace, the tourists, the whole elaborate display. This seems mad from the outside, but there's something to it, isn't there? Something important. The boy understands. Maybe not completely, maybe not consciously, but he grasps that ceremony and substance aren't opposites. That ritual can carry meaning across generations. That some things are worth preserving precisely because they seem anachronistic. By 10 o'clock, the crowd has grown to several hundred people. Tour buses disgorging passengers who have 15 minutes to photograph the famous guards before moving on to the Tower of London or Westminster Abbey. Most don't stay long enough to observe anything meaningful. They see costumes, not the men wearing them. But others linger. Watch more carefully. Begin to notice details that escape casual observation. Like the way Mitchell's eyes never stop moving, even though his head never turns. Constantly scanning faces, assessing threats, noting unusual behavior. The way his breathing remains perfectly controlled despite the heat and the weight of his uniform. The way his grip on his rifle shifts almost imperceptibly every few minutes, maintaining readiness even in apparent stillness. These observers begin to realize they're not looking at a wax figure or a human statue. They're seeing a soldier at work. The ceremony is real, but it's also functional. Beauty serving purpose, tradition carrying contemporary weight. A man in an expensive suit approaches, speaking on his mobile phone loud enough for everyone to hear. American accent, probably financial sector, clearly trying to impress whoever he's talking to. "Yeah, I'm at Buckingham Palace right now, looking at these ridiculous guards in their funny hats. Completely useless, obviously. Just for show. The Queen probably pays them minimum wage to stand around looking decorative." He positions himself directly in front of Mitchell, still talking loudly, gesturing with his free hand. Honestly, it's like a theme park. All this medieval nonsense in the 21st century. No wonder Britain's economy is struggling. Too much money wasted on meaningless traditions. Mitchell's expression doesn't change. His posture doesn't shift. But something in his stillness becomes more intentional, more concentrated. The man on the phone doesn't notice, but several other tourists step back slightly, sensing a subtle change in atmosphere. The American continues his performance, clearly enjoying having an audience that can't respond. He doesn't realize he's mocking a man who's served 3 tours in Afghanistan, who's been shot at by Taliban fighters, who's lost friends to roadside bombs, and helped evacuate wounded civilians under enemy fire. He doesn't know that Mitchell's meaningless tradition represents an unbroken line of service stretching back 3.5 centuries. That the red tunic connects him to men who died at Blenheim and Minden at Inkerman and Tel El Kebir at Ypres and Arnhem and Goose Green. But Mitchell knows. and his stillness carries that knowledge. The changing of the guard ceremony begins at 11 o'clock sharp. New guards march out from Wellington Barracks, their movement precise as clockwork, their bearing proud as lions. Music from the regimental band echoes off palace walls, stirring something deep in spectators who came expecting tourist entertainment and found themselves witnessing something approaching sacred ritual. Mitchell and his fellow guards hand over their posts with ceremony that would have been familiar to their great-grandfathers. Words spoken in the same format for decades. Movements executed exactly as prescribed by regulations written when Victoria was queen. But the words and movements matter less than what they represent. One generation passing responsibility to the next. The continuous thread of duty that ensures something precious survives from one day to the next, 1 year to the next, 1 century to the next. As the ceremony concludes, Mitchell marches back to barracks with his relief. His shift is over, but the duty continues. Will continue tomorrow, and the day after, and every day for as long as the monarchy endures. In the mess hall, over lunch that tastes better after standing motionless for 6 hours, the new recruits are full of questions. How do you do it? Peterson asks. How do you just ignore everything? Mitchell considers the question while chewing institutional beef stew. How to explain that ignoring isn't the right word? That awareness and response are different things? That the greatest strength sometimes lies in perfect stillness? You don't ignore it, he finally answers. You absorb it, all of it. The mockery, the respect, the indifference, the fascination. You let it flow through you without changing you, like water flowing around a rock. But why? Collins presses. What's the point? I mean, really, what were we actually accomplishing? Mitchell looks around the mess hall. 50 men in various stages of exhaustion, most of them having spent their mornings standing guard over a system that many people consider outdated. Young men who could have chosen easier paths, more profitable careers, less demanding lives. We're proving something can endure, he says finally. In a world where everything changes constantly, where nothing seems permanent, where tradition gets discarded as soon as it becomes inconvenient, we're demonstrating that some things are worth preserving. Not because they're perfect, but because they connect us to something larger than ourselves. MacLeod nods slowly. Like my grandfather said, during the war, people needed to believe something would survive. Exactly. But it's not just about war. It's about everything that tries to break continuity. Political upheaval, social change, economic crisis, cultural revolution. We stand still so other people can move forward, knowing something solid remains behind them. The mess hall goes quiet, not the silence of discomfort, but the quiet of men beginning to understand the weight of what they've chosen to carry. Outside, tourists continue photographing the next shift of guards. Taking pictures they'll show friends, posting images on social media, collecting evidence of their encounter with living history. Most will never know the names of the men in the photographs. Will never learn their stories or understand their sacrifices. But the photographs will outlast the tourists who take them. Will become part of the visual record that proves the ceremony continues. That the bond between Britain and its crown remains unbroken. Mitchell finishes his lunch and heads to his quarters for rest before evening duties. Tomorrow he'll stand guard again. Will absorb the mockery and the respect, the indifference and the fascination. Will let it all flow through him without changing him. Like water flowing around a rock. The rock endures. The rain begins at dawn, drumming against barracks windows like impatient fingers. October in London means gray skies and wet pavement, tourists huddled under umbrellas, and guards standing motionless in weather that would send sensible people indoors. Mitchell watches water streak down glass while pulling on his uniform, already knowing today will test every man on duty. Wet bearskin weighs more than dry bearskin. Water soaks through wool despite decades of waterproofing technology. Boots that shine like mirrors in dry weather become treacherous on slick pavement. But the guard stands regardless of weather because storms pass and duty endures. Bloody hell, Welsh mutters, staring out at the downpour. Tourists will be miserable today. Good, Mitchell replies, adjusting his tunic. Miserable tourists don't linger. Don't try to be clever. They take their photos and move along. But he knows rain creates different problems. Slippery rifles, fog breath that can be mistaken for breaking composure, water dripping from hat brims that tourists interpret as sweating. Every drop that rolls down his face will be photographed, analyzed, shared online with commentary about human endurance or British stoicism. The mess hall buzzes with conversation about the previous evening's news. Parliament debating defense spending cuts. Military families facing housing shortages. Veterans struggling with inadequate support services. Issues that affect every man in uniform, ceremonial duties or not. They want to reduce the guard complement, Sergeant Major Thompson announces during morning brief. Fewer men on duty, longer shifts, reduced training budget. Politicians think ceremony is expendable when budgets get tight. Murmurs of frustration around the room. These men understand better than anyone that their role extends beyond tourist entertainment. They provide security, maintain traditions that define national identity, represent military professionalism to international visitors. Cutting the guard saves money in the short term while destroying something irreplaceable. What can we do about it? Peterson asks. Your job. Thompson responds curtly. Better than anyone expects. Show them what they lose when they choose savings over standards. Outside, London struggles awake under heavy clouds. Commuters hurry past palace walls without looking up, focused on reaching dry offices and warm coffee. They don't notice the guards taking their positions, don't consider that someone stands watch regardless of weather, politics, or public appreciation. Mitchell's assignment today is St. James's Palace, older and quieter than Buckingham, visited mostly by tourists who've exhausted the more famous sites. The building houses working offices for several minor royals, but attracts fewer crowds and fewer cameras. In some ways, harder duty. No audience to witness professionalism. No photographers to document endurance. Just Mitchell, the rain, and the slow passage of time. He takes his position at the main gate, rifle at his side, chin level with the horizon. Rain immediately begins soaking through his uniform, but his expression doesn't change. Water runs from his bearskin hat in steady streams. His gloves grow slippery against his weapon. None of it matters. The guard stands. The first tourists arrive around 9 o'clock. German couple with expensive raincoats and professional cameras. They study Mitchell like he's an architectural feature, discussing angles and lighting in hushed voices. The woman approaches closer than most visitors dare, obviously experienced with photographing people who can't object. She positions herself at various distances, testing how the rain affects her shots. Mitchell becomes aware of the artistic composition he creates, scarlet against gray stone, stillness against flowing water, human form against ancient architecture. He's become an element in someone else's creative vision, but he doesn't mind. Artists see things others miss. Extraordinary, the woman whispers to her husband. The discipline required. The physical control. Her husband nods, lowering his camera. Makes you wonder what he's thinking about. Standing there hour after hour, day after day. What is Mitchell thinking about? The question would surprise them with its complexity. He thinks about his sister's wedding next month, wondering if he can get leave. About the letter from his mother describing their neighbor's son, killed in a car accident at 24. About the book he's reading, A History of the Guards During World War II, and how those men face challenges that make standing in rain seem trivial. He thinks about the weight of tradition and whether it's worth carrying. About the tourists who mock what they don't understand, and the ones who recognize something important without being able to name it. About the politicians who see his job as expendable, and the citizens who take for granted that someone will always stand guard. Mostly, he thinks about duty, not in abstract terms, but as a practical choice made new each moment. The choice to continue standing when his legs ache, to remain motionless when his shoulder cramps, to embody reliability when everything else feels uncertain. A school group arrives mid-morning, 20 children around 12 years old, with 2 harried teachers trying to keep them together. The rain has made everyone irritable. Children complain about being wet and cold. Teachers worry about discipline and educational value. But something about Mitchell's presence focuses their attention. One of the teachers, a young woman with soaked hair and determined expression, gathers the children around her. "This is a Queen's Guard," she explains. "He's a real soldier, not an actor or a performer. He served our country in places where people were shooting at him. Now he serves by protecting important buildings and representing something that connects us to our history." A boy raises his hand. "Why doesn't he talk to us?" "Because his job right now is to be completely focused on his duty. He's showing us what it means to be reliable, to do what you're supposed to do even when it's difficult." Mitchell appreciates her explanation. Too many adults tell children the guards are just for show, missing the deeper meaning. This teacher understands that ceremony teaches lessons about commitment, service, dedication to something beyond personal comfort. The children study him with intense curiosity. They see the rain soaking his uniform, the water dripping from his hat, the way his breathing creates small clouds in the cold air. But they also see his absolute stillness, his unwavering focus, his refusal to acknowledge discomfort. One girl, braver than the others, steps forward. "Are you cold?" she asks softly. Mitchell doesn't respond, but something in his stillness seems to answer her. Yes, he's cold. Yes, he's uncomfortable. But coldness passes and discomfort ends while duty continues. The girl nods as if she understands something important. She returns to her group without trying to make him break character, respecting the boundary between his world and hers. By noon, the rain has intensified into a proper downpour. Most tourists have retreated to museums and cafes. The streets surround St. James's Palace empty except for essential traffic and determined joggers. Mitchell stands alone, a single point of constancy in the gray, shifting landscape of the storm. This is when the job becomes most difficult and most meaningful. No audience to witness his endurance. No cameras to record his dedication. Just Mitchell and the rain and the slow passage of time. The guard standing when no one's watching, because standing is what he does. Water has soaked completely through his uniform now. His boots squelch with every small shift of weight. His rifle feels heavier, slippery, awkward. But his posture remains perfect. His expression stays neutral. His attention never wavers. A lone jogger passes, a woman in her 50s wearing expensive running gear that proves inadequate against the downpour. She slows as she approaches Mitchell, studying his rain-soaked figure with something approaching awe. "How do you do it?" she calls out, not expecting an answer, but needing to ask the question. She continues running, but her pace has changed. Something about witnessing such dedicated professionalism in terrible weather has affected her, made her consider what commitment really means, what it looks like to honor obligations regardless of conditions. The afternoon brings a brief lull in the rain, enough for a few hardy tourists to venture out. An elderly couple from Wales, visiting London for their golden wedding anniversary. They approach Mitchell with the respectful distance of people who understand military service. The man served in the Royal Navy during the 1960s. His wife worked as a nurse at a military hospital. They know the weight of duty, the cost of service, the pride that comes from serving something larger than yourself. 50 years married, the woman tells Mitchell, though she knows he can't respond. 50 years of standing by each other through everything. Rain and shine, good times and bad. Rather like what you do, I imagine. Standing firm regardless of conditions. Her husband nods, understanding the parallel. Marriage is a form of guard duty. Commitment that endures through storms. Reliability that others can depend on. They take a single photograph, respectful and unobtrusive, then move along. But their words linger in Mitchell's mind. The connection between personal commitment and professional duty. Between the promises people make to each other and the obligations soldiers accept to their nation. The rain returns with renewed intensity as evening approaches. Mitchell's relief won't arrive for 2 more hours. His uniform weighs 20 pounds now instead of 14, heavy with absorbed water. His hands have gone numb inside wet gloves. His feet feel like blocks of ice inside soaked boots. But he stands, not because regulations demand it, though they do. Not because officers are watching, though they are. He stands because endurance itself has become the message. Because someone needs to demonstrate that commitment doesn't depend on comfort, that duty survives discomfort, that some things matter more than personal convenience. A security camera mounted on the palace wall records his vigil, but no human eyes witness his dedication during this long, gray afternoon. The guard stands unwatched, unappreciated, unacknowledged. And somehow that makes the standing more meaningful, not less. This is faith in action. Not religious faith, but civic faith. Faith that service matters even when unseen. Faith that duty continues even when unrewarded. Faith that someone must stand guard, literally and figuratively, to preserve what generations have built. As darkness falls, lights come on around the palace. Golden windows in gray stone walls. Warm rectangles that promise shelter and dry clothes and hot meals. Mitchell sees the lights but doesn't long for them. His time will come. His relief will arrive. His duty will be complete. But tomorrow there will be another shift, another guard, another opportunity to demonstrate that some things endure. Rain falls and winds blow and politicians debate and budgets shrink, but the guard stands. Has stood for centuries. Will stand for centuries more, God willing, and the people understanding. Welsh arrives at 7 o'clock sharp, marching through puddles without hesitation. The changing of the guard proceeds with the same precision in rain as in sunshine, because weather doesn't alter duty. The ceremony is brief, efficient, perfect. Mitchell marches back to barracks with water squishing in his boots, and his uniform clinging to his skin like a second skin. In a mess hall, hot soup tastes like salvation, and dry clothes feel like luxury. But the real satisfaction comes from something deeper. He stood. Through everything the weather could throw at him, he stood. Proved something to himself, and to the handful of people who witnessed his vigil. Demonstrated that commitment means keeping promises even when conditions make promises difficult to keep. The new recruits gather around him, full of questions about enduring weather extremes. How do you not think about being cold and wet? Collins asks. Mitchell considers the question while toweling his hair dry. You think about other things. About the men who stood guard in worse conditions. About the people depending on you to be reliable. About what you're protecting and why it matters. But doesn't it get to you? The discomfort. Of course. I'm human. But discomfort is temporary. What we're protecting is permanent. Or at least it should be. Peterson looks thoughtful. Today felt different. Standing there with no one watching. Made it seem more real somehow. That's when you know you're doing the job right, Mitchell replies. When you stand guard for the duty itself, not for the audience. Outside, rain continues falling on empty streets around St. James's Palace. But inside the gates, another guard has taken position, standing motionless despite the weather, absorbing the rain and the cold and the loneliness, proving once again that some things matter enough to endure discomfort. The duty continues. Through rain and shine, attention and neglect, appreciation and indifference. Someone stands guard. Someone keeps watch. Someone embodies the reliability that allows others to sleep peacefully in their beds. Tomorrow will bring new weather, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that commitment survives conditions. The guard will stand. Has always stood. Will always stand. Because that's what guards do. The photograph appears on social media at 3 in the morning. Mitchell discovers it during his morning phone check, scrolling through messages from his sister about wedding plans. Someone has posted a picture of him from yesterday's rain duty, water streaming from his bearskin hat, his expression perfectly neutral despite obviously miserable conditions. The caption reads, "This is what dedication looks like." British Queen's guards standing motionless in freezing rain while tourists stayed indoors. Respect. Within hours, the image goes viral. Shared thousands of times across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Comments pour in from around the world. Some mocking the perceived futility of standing in rain. Others expressing genuine admiration for the discipline displayed. Most revealing more about the commoners than about Mitchell. Pointless tradition in the modern world. This is why I respect the military. Waste of taxpayer money. These men are heroes. Ridiculous theater for tourists. True dedication to duty. Mitchell reads through them while eating breakfast, struck by how completely strangers can misunderstand what they're seeing. The photograph captures a moment, but misses the meaning, shows the surface, but not the depth, reveals dedication without explaining what drives it. Sergeant Major Thompson addresses the viral photo during morning briefing. Some of you may have seen yesterday's photograph making rounds online. He begins. Comments range from supportive to critical to completely ignorant. None of that matters. What matters is that the image shows a guardsman doing his job properly under difficult conditions. That's the message we want the world to see. He pauses, studying faces around the room. Young men who joined the army for various reasons, but found themselves carrying responsibilities they never expected. But remember this, social media attention is temporary. Viral photos are forgotten in days. The duty you perform has lasted centuries and will continue long after everyone forgets whatever nonsense they posted online yesterday. Don't let momentary fame or criticism change how you approach your responsibilities. Sound advice, but Mitchell already feels the strange weight of unwanted celebrity. His phone buzzes constantly with friend requests from strangers, messages from people wanting to thank him or criticize him or simply connect with someone who briefly captured global attention. He ignores most of it, but some messages require reading. A veteran from the Iraq War expressing solidarity. A teacher planning to show the photograph to her students as an example of perseverance. A little girl whose grandmother served as a nurse during World War II, writing to say the picture made her proud to be British. These responses remind Mitchell why the job matters. Not for the ceremony itself, but for what ceremony represents. Continuity in an age of constant change. Reliability in times of uncertainty. Evidence that some people still believe certain things are worth preserving. His assignment today is Windsor Castle, an hour's train ride from London. Different setting, different challenges. Windsor attracts more international tourists than the London palaces, visitors who've traveled thousands of miles specifically to see the Queen's residence. Their expectations run higher, their photography more intense, their behavior more presumptuous. The castle itself imposes differently than Buckingham Palace or St. James's. Older, more fortress-like, carrying the weight of 1,000 years of royal history. Kings have died here. Queens have been crowned. Battles have been planned, victories celebrated, defeats mourned. The stones themselves seem to whisper stories of power and responsibility stretching back to William the Conqueror. Mitchell takes his position outside the state apartments, rifle at his shoulder, facing the courtyard where tourists gather. Early morning light streams across ancient stones, promising a clear day after yesterday's rain. Good weather means larger crowds, longer exposure, more opportunities for incidents. The first tour group arrives by 10 o'clock. Americans, mostly retirement age, following a guide who speaks with practiced enthusiasm about castle history. Mitchell becomes part of her narrative, a living example of traditions she describes. The Queen's Guard represents an unbroken chain of service stretching back over 3 centuries, the guide explains. These are active-duty soldiers, not ceremonial performers. Many have served in combat zones around the world. One tourist raises his hand. How do we know he's real? Could be a wax figure for all we can tell. Several people laugh. The guide smiles diplomatically, but doesn't contradict the suggestion. Mitchell remains motionless, accustomed to being discussed as if he's not present. In some ways, he isn't present, not as an individual. He's functioning as a symbol, a representation of something larger than personality. But the question bothers him more than usual, perhaps because of yesterday's viral photograph. The image captured him at his most human, wet, cold, obviously uncomfortable, yet comments still debated whether his dedication was real or performed, as if authenticity could be determined by strangers analyzing a single frozen moment. A family approaches from Australia, parents with 2 teenage children who seem more interested in their phones than royal castles. But the father stops in front of Mitchell, studying his face with respectful attention. My grandfather served in the Australian Imperial Force, he tells Mitchell quietly. Fought alongside British troops at Gallipoli, then in France. Always spoke highly of British soldiers. Professional, he said. Reliable under pressure. The man's children look up from their phones, noticing their father's serious tone. This is real military service, he continues, addressing his teenagers. Not a show. This man has probably seen combat, lost friends, made sacrifices you can't imagine. The ceremony is just one part of a much larger commitment. His daughter, perhaps 16, studies Mitchell with new interest. How can he stand so still? I can't sit through a movie without moving around. Discipline, her father replies. Training, and something else. A belief that what he's doing matters enough to endure discomfort. The family moves on, but the daughter keeps looking back. Something in Mitchell's stillness has caught her attention, made her consider what commitment looks like when stripped of convenience and comfort. Midday brings the changing of the guard ceremony, always the day's highlight for tourists. Hundreds of spectators gather as new guards march from the castle gates, their movement precise as clockwork. Music from the regimental band echoes off ancient walls. Cameras click constantly, capturing images that will be shared around the world. But Mitchell notices something different about today's ceremony. More photographers than usual, more focused attention. Several news crews with professional equipment, filming the proceedings with unusual intensity. After the ceremony, a BBC journalist approaches Sergeant Davies, the guard commander. We're doing a feature story about the viral photograph from yesterday, she explains. The public response has been extraordinary. We'd like to interview some of your men about what motivates this level of dedication. Davies considers the request carefully. Media attention can be helpful or harmful, depending on how stories are presented. The regiment has learned to be cautious about journalists who arrive with predetermined narratives about meaningless tradition or taxpayer waste. What angle are you taking? Davies asks. Honestly, we're as surprised as anyone by the public response. The photograph has sparked genuine debate about duty, service, the value of tradition. We want to explore what drives young men to choose this kind of responsibility. That afternoon, 3 guardsmen, including Mitchell, are interviewed in a quiet room within the castle. The journalist, Sarah Chun, approaches the subject with genuine curiosity rather than cynical assumption. Her questions focus on motivation rather than mockery, understanding rather than entertainment. The photograph shows you standing in awful weather with no one watching, she says to Mitchell. What kept you there? What were you thinking about during those long, wet hours? Mitchell considers his words carefully. Military media training emphasizes staying on message, avoiding political statements, representing the regiment professionally. But Chin's question deserves an honest answer. I was thinking about reliability, he finally responds. About being someone others can depend on, regardless of conditions. The weather was miserable, but weather changes. What doesn't change is the need for someone to stand guard, to be present when presence is required. But why does that matter in the 21st century? What relevance does ceremonial guard duty have in the modern world? It's not just ceremonial. We're active duty soldiers with operational responsibilities beyond what tourists see. But the ceremony itself serves a purpose. It demonstrates that some things survive because people choose to maintain them. In a world where everything seems temporary, where traditions get discarded as soon as they become inconvenient, we represent continuity. Chen nods, making notes. The online response to your photograph has been intense. Thousands of comments, most from people who've never met you, but feel strongly about what you represent. How does that affect you? Mitchell thinks about his phone buzzing with messages from strangers, about comments from people who see him as either a hero or a fool without knowing anything about him personally. It's strange, he admits, but it shows how hungry people are for examples of commitment. Whether they support what we do or criticize it, they're responding to the idea that someone still takes duty seriously, that someone still believes certain things are worth preserving. The other guardsmen share similar perspectives. Welsh talks about joining the army to serve his country and discovering that service takes many forms, not all of them involving combat. Peterson describes growing up in a working-class family that valued reliability above almost everything else, finding in the guards a way to embody those values publicly. Chen's final question catches them off guard. If you could speak directly to the millions of people who've seen that photograph, what would you tell them? Mitchell doesn't hesitate. That what they're seeing is just one moment of a much longer commitment. We stand guard every day, in every weather, whether anyone's watching or not. The photograph went viral because someone happened to capture a difficult moment, but we're here during easy moments too. The duty continues regardless of recognition. Welsh adds, and that ceremony isn't the opposite of substance. Sometimes ceremony is how substance gets preserved. The traditions we maintain connect us to generations of soldiers who made much greater sacrifices than standing in the rain. The interview appears on BBC News that evening, part of a longer feature about military service and public duty. The piece treats the guards respectfully, focusing on their professionalism rather than the novelty of their uniforms. Comments online are mostly positive, with many viewers expressing surprise at the thoughtfulness of the responses. But Mitchell knows media attention is fleeting. Tomorrow there will be new stories, new viral photographs, new subjects for public fascination. The guard will continue standing regardless, because that's what they do, not for attention or appreciation, but because the duty itself has value. Back at barracks that night, the 3 new recruits who started the week complaining about the weight of their uniforms seemed different, less focused on discomfort, more aware of purpose. They've begun to understand that carrying weight is the point, not an unfortunate side effect. The interview made me think, Collins says over dinner, about why I really joined up. I thought it was for adventure, maybe to prove something to myself. But watching the public response to that photograph, people are starving for examples of commitment, for evidence that someone still takes responsibility seriously. McLeod agrees. My grandfather's generation had the war to define their service. We have to find meaning in peacetime duties. But maybe that's harder and more important. Anyone can be heroic when lives are at stake. It takes something else to stand guard when nothing dramatic is happening. Peterson, the youngest, asked the question that's been bothering all of them. But what if they're right? The critics online. What if we're just expensive tourist attractions? What if all this tradition really is meaningless in the modern world? The mess hall goes quiet. It's a question every guard faces eventually, usually during long hours of standing in uncomfortable conditions while tourists treat them like decorations. Mitchell sets down his fork, considering his response carefully. Meaning isn't something you can prove with statistics or justify with cost-benefit analysis, he finally says. But look at the response to that photograph. Millions of people saw something that moved them, made them think, sparked conversations about duty and service and commitment. That doesn't happen because we're expensive decorations. It happens because we represent something people recognize as important, even if they can't articulate what it is. He pauses, looking around at faces that reflect his own questions and doubts. Every generation has to decide what's worth preserving from the previous one. The monarchy, the guards, the ceremonies, none of it survives automatically. It continues because people choose to continue it. And people only make that choice if they believe it has value beyond entertainment. Welsh nods slowly. The little girl yesterday, asking if I was real. She saw something her parents missed. Something about presence, about reliability, about someone being there when they're supposed to be there. That's not nothing. No, Miche Yigris. That's everything. That's what civilization depends on. People doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it, whether anyone's watching or not. Outside, London settles into evening routine. Commuters heading home from work, students meeting friends for dinner, tourists planning tomorrow's sightseeing. Most of them taking for granted that someone stands guard while they sleep, that institutions continue functioning while they pursue private concerns, that the complex machinery of society operates reliably because dedicated people maintain it. The guards will stand tomorrow, and the day after, through changing weather, shifting politics, public attention, and public indifference. Not because their duty is glamorous or profitable or even fully understood by those they serve. They stand because someone must. Because continuity matters. Because the bridge between past and future requires guardians who take responsibilities seriously, who honor commitments regardless of conditions, who embody the reliability that allows everything else to function. The photograph captures a moment. The duty captures a lifetime.